Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the George Gerbner Lecture in Communication. For those of you who don't know, George Gerbner was the second dean of the Annenberg School and served the longest tenure of any Annenberg dean, nearly 25 years. Cannot even imagine doing that. During his tenure, he established Annenberg as a leading school for communication in the world. He was crucial in the formation of communication as a distinct field of study, playing major roles in the founding of ICA and the Journal of Communication, which was edited here for a large number of years here at the Annenberg School. He was also, as you all know, an internationally recognized and respected scholar in his own right, in his work on the Cultural Indicators Project and cultivation analysis. This lecture series was established in the late 1980s to honor the accomplishments of Annenberg alumni who initially worked with George Gerbner, and then, as we moved on, Annenberg alums more generally. Among its past speakers, for those of you who are on the inside of the world of academia, included Dan Schiller, who was just visiting here last semester from University of California, San Diego, Michael Morgan of the University of Massachusetts, Dolph Zillman of the University of Alabama, Donna Schwartz of Minnesota, Christopher Kepke, who worked at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Robin Nabby of the University of California, Santa Barbara, Erica Falk of Johns Hopkins, Paul Waldman, who was a contributing editor for the American Prospect at the time, one of our most famous alums, Mary Ellen Mark, the world-class photographer, Claire Wardle, who now runs a nonprofit called First Draft, and just last year, Riley Snorton, who will be back at Penn to give a talk later this week, who is currently in the Africana Studies and Feminist Gender and Sexuality Studies programs at Cornell University. We're pleased to add another of our impressive alums to this list of Gerbner lecturers. However, the honor of introducing him goes to Professor Carolyn Morgan, who was instrumental in bringing him here to Annenberg today, and who I believe was his advisor when he was here. So please welcome Carolyn Marvin to the podium, who will introduce today's speaker.
Hi there. In 2013, when I found out Ron Nirenberg was running for city council in San Antonio, I started following the campaign. I was quite blown away. The campaign included a YouTube channel on which Ron conducted extended interviews with beloved former mayors to seek their advice on what direction San Antonio should take. They were amazing. The former mayors obviously loved him. The videos educated the voters, and the conversations revealed Ron as an informed and articulate interlocutor who knew how to listen well. The campaign was a model of attention to the concerns of his district, the most diverse in San Antonio, for which he detailed plans with actual working parts and engaged citizens in meaningful, deliberative consultations. It was exciting to watch. This was what democracy should look like: transparency, clarity, presence in the lives of constituents, ethical accountability, respectful interaction. It was a demonstration that democratic virtues can win in politics. For 2 council terms, and as one of the tri-chairs of a visionary San Antonio Tomorrow Planning Committee, Ron continued gathering the grassroots on behalf of the initiatives in development and sustainability, transportation, and water security he had set out for his district. Then he threw in his hat to try and lead the 9th largest city in the country. With only half the amount of money raised by his incumbent opponent, he won by 9 percentage points, the first challenger to win against any San Antonio incumbent in 20 years who stood for re-election. This was a serious political talent. Where'd this guy come from? Here. though he also grew up the son of Peace Corps parents in the city that those of us who have ever lived there are proud to call the People's Republic of Austin, where dreams of blue Texas run deep. After summa cum lauding from Trinity University, where he fell in love with San Antonio, Annenberg was his next stop because he was going to be a sports journalist. And what happened here? He waged his first hard-fought campaign. That was to win Erica Prosper, the accomplished daughter of migrant laborers from the onion fields of the Rio Grande, a Plan II honors graduate of the University of Texas. Visiting Annenberg for Prospective Students Day, Ron was smitten by Erica, his student guide. Let me put this as charitably as I can. Erica did not have exactly the same reaction. She had a strong response to a certain set of sartorial choices, some flared bell-bottoms, a loud, big-collared polyester shirt, and a long, curly hairdo. It took a while for her to decide to date him. But win her as a life partner he did, and with her smarts, her formidable marketing skills, and political instincts, Erica has been his trusted, indispensable advisor while keeping up with Jonah, the son they're raising, her own successful career as a business executive, and most recently as incoming chairwoman of the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Erica was just explaining to me that they're about to roll out a bilingual entrepreneurship guide to be distributed to parents in the schools, and they will also be free online for anyone. Ron and Erica graduated with MAs back when we had them. I'm coming back to that. Ron then went to work as program director for the Annenberg Public Policy Center, where he earned the equivalent of a second graduate degree from the Church of Kathleen Jameson. I'm pretty sure he's going to be talking about that. Moving back to San Antonio, he ran the university radio station and organized ambitious programming that included collaborations between local musicians and various cultural and nonprofit organizations. He even commissioned a local pianist to compose a piece called the San Antonio Jazz Suite with 8 movements narrated by a local poet laureate that told the history of the city of San Antonio through music. And he ran a business. And then he ran for office. There is much to say about the steady competence and ethical transparency with which the mayor has continued to build on what he started as a councilman that I can't detail because the list is too long and impressive and we would never get to hear him. I will briefly throw out moving forward on conservation-based water security, a multimodal transportation reform agenda to keep a growing city from choking itself, increased broadband access, policies for development and sustainability, a sanctuary city, child literacy, green energy, and new budget priorities for investing in neighborhoods that have been on the short end of the public investment stick. He also has not hesitated to push back against some special interests when he needed to. This is not the progressive politics of the Twitterverse. This is the daily business of administering a $2.7 billion budget for 1.5 million people in a diverse, growing city with some of the starkest income inequality of any American city, while constantly consolidating support for a long-term vision. The mayor has used his deep knowledge of the issues to explain to people in an accessible way how the city is a set of related parts, all of which affect each other. He has bet that the citizens of San Antonio will make good choices when they understand what's going on. And he does not leave out discussions of values. This is a phenomenal communicative skill at a time of enormous challenges for little d democratic politics. Some of you may have heard that the mayor is an avid bodybuilder. It's true that back in the day, he was an actual amateur strongman champion, and Kyle Cassidy has the photos to prove it. I believe 600 pounds is his record lift. I have noticed how bodybuilding metaphors pop up in his civic rhetoric. He'll describe a hard policy challenge as an extraordinary lift, which the citizens of San Antonio must find encouraging since he knows how to do that. This brings me to his thesis, On Time, Under Budget, a wonderful, readable participant ethnography about the subculture of competitive bodybuilding. PhD students, I urge you to check it out as a model of how to conceptually organize the messy data of serious ethnography. I looked at it again recently to probe for clues to the future mayor. In an afterword to the thesis, Appropriate Self-Reflexivity, Ron commented on how the challenge of making sense of every single conversation turned out to be an arduous undertaking. Excellent preparation for listening to the people. He spoke of Atlas, who bore the weight of the world on his shoulders. This is surely what it means to be a serious political leader. The same intelligence and clarity with which he frames the voters to the city today, it's there. But the most revealing thing was this. At the end of the thesis, Ron added on a section of informant comments that didn't quite fit his conceptual framework. This capacity, this heart for the folks who don't quite fit, and for recognizing the value of what they can bring to the table, is a big part of what we need from our best politicians. If you follow Ron online and in the press, and I recommend it, you will be struck by his animating vision of equity, decency, and resilience as standards by which we ought to judge our politics. And you might also notice how, in a totally unsappy way, he regularly works his young son into the discussion by measuring every political decision against the yardstick of how it will affect the city that Jonah and the other children of San Antonio deserve today and will inherit tomorrow. Please welcome a son of Annenberg who did something with his degree that I am very sure George Gerbner would have approved of.
Good evening. Thank you, Carolyn, for the warm introduction. I hope it was caught on tape, because there are a lot of moments in politics and in political life that you sometimes wonder about the choices that you made and the sacrifices that you have to make to do them, but that's quite an accounting. Not always remembered the same way in some aspects, but thank you very much. And I thank you all for having me today. I have to say that the email I got from Dr. Delicarpini to invite me to do this lectures, Erica was quick to point out, would be and should be and is one of the deep honors of my life. I owe so much to this university and to this school. It truly changed my life, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to do what I do every day. So, as we get into this, I also want to say thank you to Erica, my wife, who is my object of pursuit, my classmate, the love of my life, and also the person who reminds me exactly why I do what I do and help psych me up for today as well. And then my son Jonah, whose life actually depended on Annenberg. So thank you both for being here. Yeah. So I'm going to tell you a story today about how someone like me becomes mayor without any money, without any political influence, but a belief in three things. How every human being deserves the service of a good government, how as a father and a citizen, I have an opportunity and a responsibility to leave a better place for my son and for future generations, and a belief that was formed particularly with the work that I did at the Annenberg Public Policy Center, that every average neighbor, any average neighbor, can change the world, whether it's the youngest citizens in our communities who are wondering if their voice really matters, to the elderly man who collects trains and who wonders if society actually still cares about his story anymore. And all of this is meant to tell you and to remind me and the people I work with that individuals who are informed or engaged are the most precious resource that this country has. We have the God-given right, actually the responsibility, regardless of your gender, your status, your background, or your race, to say that your voice matters. And that is truly what happens when we change the world. So I came to Annenberg in 1999, and I wanted to be the beat writer for the Boston Red Sox. Life happened, though, and I ran into a lovely woman named Erica Prosper, and my plans changed. In fact, I remember in between my first year and my second year, when the Annenberg master's students at the time would get apprenticeships in the fields for which they were interested in pursuing, I was about to go to New Jersey to work with Steve Sable on NFL Films, and I had the choice of whether to do that or follow Erica to San Antonio. I chose San Antonio. And ended up working at a place called the Intercultural Development Research Association, doing bilingual education research, but more importantly, living with Erica Prosper. This hangs in our bathroom to this day, and we look at it almost every day. If you don't know what that is, it's a keychain that we got from the 40th anniversary gala, which was my first year here on campus. And when I am talking about my story, I think about, with communication students in particular, I think about three things that they want to know. One, does my degree in communication even matter in this world? Two, what can I do with it? And three, how does a school like Annenberg produce leaders? So if you know, you should know, you walk by it every day, by the stairwell is this quote, and it says, "Every human advancement or reversal can be understood through communication. The right to free communication carries with it the responsibility to respect the dignity of others, and this must be recognized as irreversible. Educating students to effectively communicate this message and to be of service to all people is the enduring mission of this school." We don't read that enough, and Erica makes sure, though, that we read it every day. The three tenets in there are what I have lived, what I lived here as a student for 2 years, what have shaped me, and what ultimately educated me to be a politician. They are, number one, advancement or reversal of our society does depend on communication. What you do matters. What you study here matters. Two, if we're going to communicate, we must have the responsibility, we must embrace the responsibility of respecting the dignity of other people. Words are powerful. In fact, I have a picture of a pen. When Jonah was 3, he liked to play with the Xerox machine. You remember that? He Xeroxed a picture of a pen. I have it sitting on my desk as a reminder that that is probably the most important thing that I can do. The words that we speak as elected officials, they're mightier than any other tool that we have. The third thing in this quote, though, that's important is that if we are to communicate, we must be in service of all people. This especially as an elected representative of an entire city. So before I go into a discussion about what made me who I am as a mayor, I think it's important also, though, to step back and understand the important role that this school played. And for almost 10 years, beyond just educating me, I worked for the Policy Center, and I learned that a couple things. One, every single individual, including our young citizens, have stories. Then they have changes that they want to make in the world, and probably you're seeing that all over the place right now. The world is convulsing with young people wanting to see changes in their communities. So I want to show you real quick for a minute what I did at the Annenberg Public Policy Center with a project called Student Voices.
brings the property value down. It's an eyesore.
And they found contamination over on the other side of it.
They could be doing more. I mean, you should move it out. Make something for the kids to do or something. I don't know.
I don't like it. They need to do something. Start building something here so we can, you know, cover this area up back here or something.
A city is a mix of neighborhoods. When industries moved in, people followed, building their homes near where they worked. Then when the businesses closed, the factories were abandoned. Some people moved out, but many others stayed. What's left behind are decaying neighborhoods with empty houses amid abandoned and contaminated industrial sites. Hi, my name is Alexis McLean. I live in Trenton, New Jersey. Today we're going to talk about how government agencies try to solve problems. Often your problems. We're going to use brownfields as an example. Brownfields are these abandoned industrial sites. We're going to show you how the City of Trenton, the Department of New Jersey Environmental Protection, and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency work together to fix up these contaminated sites so new businesses can build on them. That brings back the jobs and the people. This is Trenton City Hall, where we have a meeting with Mayor Doug Palmer. Laws usually define who has the power or responsibility to act. City powers are defined by each city charter or city code. They include things like make laws impacting only local issues, provide essential services such as water, electricity, police, fire, and sanitation services, maintain streets and parks, authorize public improvements, make traffic regulations.
The powers of the state government are defined by each state's constitution. Powers such as make laws on statewide issues, issue licenses like your driver's license or car registration, regulate interstate business, conduct elections, establish local governments, manage public health and safety.
The United States Constitution spells out what the federal government is required or allowed to do. Make laws impacting all states, print money, impose taxes, make treaties and conduct foreign policy, oversee delivery of the mail, regulate interstate and international trade, declare war, provide an army and navy. You can learn more about the powers of government by going to the Student Voices website. You can see that some powers are shared by all three levels of government, such as the ability to make laws or impose taxes. But the power also comes from you, the voter, you, the taxpayer. You can demand certain services. What's important to remember is that all governments have power and responsibility. So do you. It's a two-way street. You just have to find out which government or agency has control of the issue that you want to resolve, and then take action.
So what's important about that video, number one, is that those students weren't old enough to vote. But I would venture to say that in terms of the proficiency, the understanding of how local government works and what it is meant to do, the direct connection it has with people's quality of life, they were probably more informed than most voters. And so what that was trying to express is that Student Voices was bringing to bear in classrooms the very important lessons that we take for granted for active citizenship and people's role in how they shape their communities. We also had several different cities we worked with. In fact, we worked in cities that, in Denver, here's John Hickenlooper. We had students directly work with them, talking with the candidates that were running for election about the issues that they cared about. There's Phil Hardberger in San Antonio. Michael Nutter, who was a council member at the time in Philadelphia and obviously became mayor. Cory Booker, when running both times against Sharp James in New Jersey. And then Rudy Giuliani in New York. Obviously, all of these mayors taught something different about the role that a mayor can play. We filmed a video during Student Voices called Mayors in a Time of Crisis during the aftermath of the attacks in 9/11. These weren't the only 5 cities that we worked in. In fact, there were 22 different cities, thanks to the Pew Charitable Trust, Annenberg Foundation, Trust at Sunnylands, and so forth. And what I saw there were students getting engaged, even though they couldn't vote, demanding change in the local communities. And what was really inspiring about that is that you saw governments respond. In fact, our first project in San Antonio, there was a young candidate, an African-American candidate for mayor, who was a minor candidate, also ran, happened to take the time to visit the schools that were part of the Student Voices project. The students there demanded that he have a seat on stage during the debates, and became not just an also-ran, but a formidable mayoral candidate. Ended up, placing 10% of the vote. Not a whole lot, but enough to be invited to all the debates and so forth. You saw people be happy that they were realizing a voice in their government, and I felt inspired by that. I was incredibly grateful for that experience, and I've wanted to have more of it. In fact, not just experiencing the communication, the challenges and the issues that they were working with, but the joy of actually feeling that they were involved. For 9 years I worked on this project. We also had a role and developed content for factcheck.org, factchecked.org, Annenberg Classroom, Justice Learning, Justice Talking. If these projects, you remember, they were quite impactful. And walking through the new policy center, I got a glimpse of that, and it was incredibly satisfying to see the impact that they've had. Not just impact globally on our civic dialogue, but the impact it has had in each one of these communities. Life happens again, though, and my son was born in 2008, and we decided that the most important thing for him, it was a personal choice, was that we find a really good early childhood education program. We wanted to find a good early childhood, quality childhood program, and we found one at the JCC, the Jewish Community Center. I also wanted to make sure that I was providing a little security in terms of salary, so I ended up working at Trinity University, my alma mater, my undergraduate alma mater. I taught in the communication department, but as Dr. Marvin said, my main function was to run the radio station. We moved for personal reasons into a district that was about to see their incumbent council member leave. But the reason why I ended up getting engaged in the community, in our neighborhood association, was because I was seeing those same voices now being personified in my son. The kind of neighborhood he would grow up in. Is it safe? The kind of parks that he would live next to. The choices I was making had a lot to do with making it a better place for my son to inherit. So I ended up getting involved in my neighborhood association because I showed up at a couple of meetings, and they said, hey, here's a young guy. We're not used to people under 50 being involved in the neighborhood association, so why shouldn't he come and join us on the board? And I did. It just so happened at the same time that I became involved in the neighborhood association, the park that drew us to the area was being threatened by a major development that would have overrun the park. Hardburger Park, which was named after the former mayor, was 300+ acres of beautiful parkland in the middle of San Antonio. And there was a proposal to raise a bunch of it to build a Walmart. Obviously, the neighbors didn't like it. And so one of the first things that we had to do is figure out how to get a big retailer to respect our neighborhood, to respect the voices of the people in the community. And what we wanted out of the neighborhood that we just bought into. I took from that a neighborhood can actually change things, especially a neighborhood when they were working with our council members. And the council members in that area helped us work out a solution that shrunk the footprint of the Walmart, gave us back some parkland, and made it an overall better outcome than if we had just gotten run over without raising our voices. And if a neighborhood can change things, why can't other organizations do the same? In fact, when I was working at Trinity University and we were starting to celebrate our 10th anniversary in the format of jazz, we started to engage in planning for a year of jazz. I used the lessons that I was taught about neighborhoods, and the fact that neighborhoods are not just a place of people, they're people that are brought together for a mission or a belief system. So we wanted to create something for Trinity to engage a citywide network of arts and cultural communities as if they were neighborhoods, connecting them, coming together to celebrate our language of jazz. For about a year, almost like a citywide mayoral campaign, I brought together organizations who would celebrate jazz by playing, staging concerts that we would sponsor on the jazz radio station. What this allowed us to do was basically create a network, citywide network of constituencies, whether it was Latino arts organizations, our parks organizations, all those logos there at the bottom were brought together for the purpose of celebrating our jazz radio station with one mission: to celebrate what would be a year of jazz. At the same time, we organized a jazz suite to celebrate San Antonio's story through the language of jazz. It was called the San Antonio Jazz Suite, 8 movements of music that would celebrate San Antonio's history through the language of jazz, to celebrate, again, our year of jazz. That was at a crucial time for me because Erica, wanting to get me a little bit larger platform for this celebration, bought me a lunch with the mayor at a silent auction for $100. And I talked to Mayor Castro about this great program that we put together called Year of Jazz, and the intent was to use jazz as a platform to celebrate our city story and all the different diverse constituencies in it. I was able to explain to him how our city's visioning process, SA 2020, could be enhanced by our format here, and asked him to come out and read to students at the actual Year of Jazz celebration. And this is what was on the front page of the Metro section the day after our Year of Jazz kickoff. This was important because our city now was taking a role, our radio station, our media platform, was taking a role in what was a citywide strategic planning effort to celebrate and create a community vision for San Antonio called SA 2020. And there was this thing that where all neighborhoods were coming together to create a vision for our future. SA 2020 was a strategic planning process that I'd seen taking place in many different cities, from Tulsa to Denver and so forth, that were creating visions of their future for the city. San Antonio was undergoing the same thing, and where people from all corners of the city were coming together to talk about what should their future look like with transportation, with neighborhoods, with public safety, and so forth. And so this was a way of integrating our radio station into that conversation. But obviously, with just the media, with just our jazz radio station, that wasn't, and I wanted to do more for our community than just celebrate the jazz radio station. So I started getting involved in SA 2020. This is the production of this was the book that was produced along with the community meetings that took place. And the point of all of this is, here I am as a general manager of a radio station and teaching it in the communication department of Trinity University. And I wanted to have a role in the stake of my a stake in the future direction of my city. You don't need to be a mayor or a council member or even a HOA president to get involved and to sign up and be part of this. Change starts at a neighborhood level. And so there were lots of different neighborhoods and collections of people because of their place or their purpose or even their cultural organization mission, and they came to this and became part of the conversation. So I started going to these meetings, and inspired by the lessons here at Annenberg and also the Student Voices project itself, I got the idea that I wanted to advance my city. I wanted to do more than just advance my jazz radio station and do work in the Trinity Communication Department. I wanted to do something more for my son and the city that we would inherit, he would inherit. So one of the difficult decisions that I made at that point with the incumbent city council member leaving was talking to my wife Erica and asking her, what am I doing? I wanted to do more, and I was coming up with no solutions other than to, start getting more involved in the community at this level. So I'm sorry, guys, I'm nervous. Can you tell? I'll take a deep breath, babe. So let me just cut to the chase. One of the most important decisions of my life was reached at that point, and all this stuff that I'm talking about here and trying to find a common thread to why I'm doing what I'm doing, I reached. I was tired of just working through media. I was tired of just being the communication guy at the radio station. I wanted to impact my son's future. And the incumbent the incumbent city council member at the time decided he wasn't going to run again. And I was urged by some friends, hey, you're doing all this stuff with SA 2020. You got involved in a leadership San Antonio program that helped us learn a little bit more about the functioning of different organizations and political systems in San Antonio. I had just gotten through a very wonderful career at the Annenberg Public Policy Center. I'm I'm passionate about civic participation. What are you doing all that for? You keep talking about your son's city and the future that he wants to inherit, or that he will inherit. Do something about it. And so I did. And the point of all this, and please forgive my nerves, is that you don't have to be anyone other than a neighbor that's passionate about our community at the local level, a nonpartisan local level. You can run for council. And so I did. And so I remember coming home to Erica that night. I had thrown this idea at her a couple of weeks before, and I said, Erica, I'm going to do it. And she was ready. God love her, she was ready for it. Because not only would I be gone all the time campaigning, not only was this for a job that didn't pay anything, well, I actually did, paid $20 a week for a maximum of 52 weeks. So I'd give up my paycheck, I'd give up my time, I'd probably give up seeing some of the best moments of my son's life. And so she said, yes, do it, because she felt that the flame that was burning that began here at Annenberg, I was looking for ways to keep it lit through SA 2020, through the Year of Jazz, through having the mayor speak at Year of Jazz, and the only way to keep it going and to spread that love of civic engagement, to impact my son's future, was to actually do something about it and run for council, so I did. But here's the reality that nobody prepares you for. To run for office requires money, and you don't always have the most, and I never did. I always promised people I would not be outworked. I would be outraised, but I would not be outworked. I would speak truthfully because of those tenets, again, from the Annenberg mission. I would respect the dignity of all people, so I'd talk to all people and try to be as honest as I can about the difficult issues that we have to face. But I would do it in a way that was pointing towards the future. That's all well and good, and I said, if I win, I win. If I don't, at least I put it all out there. My dad used to say, to thine own self be true, quoting Polonius from Hamlet, and that was always ringing in my head, as was Rocky. I watched Rocky II, probably about 20 times during the first campaign, because that's the one he won. But the part that nobody prepares you for, really, you knew it was going to happen, but they don't really prepare you for it, are the times when people use communication not to advance a conversation, but to reverse it, to attack people, to bring you down. And if you dare run against someone who's an establishment pick or has all the money or political backing, which I did in my first race, in fact, it turned out to be the most expensive race in council history in the city of San Antonio, the one I ran in a very high-profile district. And not because I spent a lot, but because my opponent spent about 5 times as much as I did. If you threaten that establishment, you will have the kitchen sink thrown at you. And so here's an example of the kitchen sink. This showed up at people's doorsteps, in their mailboxes, and just handed to you without any attribution. It was very illegal, but we knew where it was coming from. We had a good idea where it was coming from. So all of you Annenberg alums might like this. That's a picture of me when I was competing for Mr. Penn. What you can't see clearly is that the bottom half is blurred out to make it look like a lewd photo. They found that somewhere online. obviously plagiarized. But you can see, read a little bit about what you should know about Nirenberg. He's pro-abortion and pro-homosexual agenda. My thesis, they got right. Modes of constructing the masculine body. That's true. Anti-Second Amendment, self-proclaimed progressive. That's true. Supports Castro's liberal agenda. Using a little editorializing there. George Soros, only endorsed by Democrats. Definitely not true. Group leader for SA 2020. True. So, and then I loved this. This showed me that I made it. Because when you parody somebody's logo, you obviously are taking it as a legitimate symbol. And not only were they parodying it, they were parodying it, you know what I mean, with the Obama logo. So that was the last gasp of a failed establishment candidate. And that's an example of the wrong way to communicate in campaigns. I remember just talking with the reporter from the Daily Pennsylvanian today. He asked me, I forget exactly what the question was, but something that has stuck with me is that when students were involved in Student Voices, the students that we were engaged with and were looking at these questionnaires and talking with the candidates directly, they were coming up with a profile of a candidate, of an ideal candidate who was accessible, who was honest, who was ethical, had nothing to do with race or gender or anything like that. And sometimes didn't have anything to do with the politics of that individual. They wanted somebody who was ethical, transparent, accessible, and honest with them. So being a candidate on a campaign trail, having experienced that ethic and that ethos from Annenberg was sort of an out-of-body experience for me. Because I could see what we were doing as a campaign, and I always wanted to live up to that standard. I wanted to be a better candidate. I wanted to be the candidate that the students that I was working with in Student Voices would have respected. And so this is what we chose to do. I chose to do. I came up with a vision plan that, contrary to what my consultant said, in fact, he advised me, don't do this. Don't put all of your ideas on paper, because that would hold yourself accountable to every dot that's in there. It's high risk. I said, you know what? I'm not in this for glory and career. I'm in this to make sure that the people who vote for me know what I stand for, so they're not surprised when I start doing it. That was a 24-page book, white paper that I wrote with all the issues, very similar to the kinds of structure that you saw in SA 2020. And I started going around town to political influencers, people like Lionel Sosa, who is Erica's former boss, and people like Phil Hardberger, who is a former mayor. And Mayor Hardberger, to this day, said that he didn't endorse anyone after he left the mayor's office. He was a former Supreme Court Chief Justice of the Court of Appeals in San Antonio, in Texas. After his esteemed career and after he became mayor, he signed off of politics and he said he's never going to endorse anyone again. He endorsed me because of this. And we published it at some expense so that the community could see what I was talking about. And I rolled this up and I put it on as many doors as I could so people could see exactly what I wanted to do. And it was a scrape to win, but we did after a runoff. And this is a trip down memory lane. I thought I'd show you my first political campaign video. I'm Ron Nirenberg, and I believe in progress for San Antonio. I want my children to grow up here, to get educated here, and to prosper here. I want our grandchildren to know that when we had choices to make, we acted boldly to build San Antonio into the great American city. And that our North Side District 8 was a vital part of that growth and prosperity. That's why I'm running for City Council. People tell me I have the focus, education, and the ability to represent you best. I know I have the desire and the commitment to make you proud. Vote me as your City Councilman in District 8 in 2013. I'm Ron Nirenberg, and I believe in progress. Okay, the other thing we did is my opponent at the time was going door to door, and he was really trying to intimidate our campaign because he said he's now knocked on 5,000 doors and 10,000 doors and 20,000 doors. And I didn't have money to put that video on air. let alone hire a bunch of block walkers to go out and knock on every single door and collect them as if they were numbers. But it occurred to me when I walked into this man's house, he was 90 years old, and he wanted me to come in because I was running for council, and he was so thrilled to show me his Christmas time playset in February because he really didn't have anybody to talk to. So I went in, and I started talking to him, and I asked him if I could take a picture of him so I can put it online like I did with my videos. Because, you know what? I have 130,000 neighbors in this district, and every one of them has a story. And there's no way I can compete with the numbers of knocks on the doors. But if I could show people that I'm actually listening to them, and I put some pictures up of people that they may not know, that's where Meet Your Neighbor comes from. That's where Be a Better Neighbor comes from. Because I'm convinced that when people on the north side of District 8 talk to the people on the east side of District 8, where it's vastly socioeconomically disparate, they would begin to understand some of the difficult challenges that we have to deal with that were in that vision book, where it feels like the world is on your shoulders because it's not a clear-cut answer every time. So I did this throughout the campaign. Other politicians started copying it years later, but this was called the Meet Your Neighbors campaign, and it's an opportunity for me to use communication to advance our city, to help them understand each other. Same kinds of stuff happened in the mayoral race. And I'll spare you the details of how I came to the decision to run for mayor, other than to say, if a city or a community is not advancing, is not being progressive, and not having those bold actions that I thought were necessary for a city like my son to inherit, then I'm going to do what I can to change the conversation. That's what those students would have wanted, those student voices students. So I decided to run for mayor. But it wasn't after a couple of years of this kind of stuff, where people who thought maybe I was moving up, Tea Party and other fringe groups would put out stuff like this. And here I was, the fourth scariest person, I think, in the United States, according to one. I sent this to my dad. He loved this because it said not only was I smart, but that I was wanting to invest their money. Oh, my goodness. I was wanting to take their money and put it in things like transportation and reforming contracts with police and fire unions. And they also did stuff like this, where they said beyond Castro and his visionary ideas for the future, I agree with him, so I must be terrible. I must be puppeting his things, and there's the police union logo there. They'd put up stuff like this, and it would arrive in people's mailboxes. This was actually during the campaign. And then, of course, the best one of all, this was a website that was put up by my former opponent, now former mayor, last-ditch effort in the runoff to do a couple things. Number one, try to scare people that I'm so progressive, I must be liberal. But two, if you associate with liberal, that means you probably don't want to vote for me. This failed miserably, by the way. It was parodied, and it was ridiculed, and it ultimately became part of a story of a lost election for an incumbent. Same thing with the first election. This is what we chose to do. I put out the same plan against my consultants' wishes because I wanted people to know what I thought needed to happen in the city, and gave them about 32 pages to work with. Things like ethics reform and accountability issues, transparency in government, transportation, environmental issues, very clear on things like the Paris Climate Accord, for instance. And here's, of course, a video
I'm Ron Nirenberg.
that did air on
I'm running
TV.
for mayor to make San Antonio the city you deserve. A city that is fiscally responsible with your tax dollars, that isn't stuck in gridlock, that's safe from violent crime. A city whose leaders are held to the highest ethical standards and who face serious consequences when they violate the public trust. Our current mayor wants you to think that San Antonio is doing okay, but just okay is not good enough. I'm Ron Nirenberg. As your mayor, I'll work with you to make San Antonio the city you deserve.
And so what's the big deal? I mean, here I am, an average neighbor that just wants to run for office so I can improve the city that Jonah inherits, that I want to have a better city for myself. You know, shame on me for wanting mass transit so we're not stuck in gridlock all the time. But I was having to be honest about this stuff, and I wanted people to understand who I was asking them to elect. At the same time, more advancing of communication, being positive about the agenda that I was bringing forth, we had town halls all throughout the district. that I was currently working in on specific issues like economic development. I had kids' town halls too, and I've been continuing to do this where I actually we go into the neighborhood schools, elementary schools all the way up to high schools. They can't vote, but I want them to understand, number one, it's just a passion thing for me because I love the work of Student Voices and seeing the passion from those kids about the fact, wow, somebody's talking to them in their community drives me and gets me up every day. These are the best moments of being a mayor, being a council member. And then we brought it to Facebook Live. Everybody knows how Facebook Live works. I started doing this during the campaign, and we peaked at about 200,000 viewers, which in a city of 1.5 million blows any TV station out of the water. We did this with the police chief. We've done this for every week since February of 2016 or 2017, and it's continued to blossom from there. And ultimately, again, open, transparent dialogue, especially in local government, where the voting numbers are so dismal. In fact, it's about 10 to 15% voter turnout for local government, ultimately brought us here. So now what? Now what? I've caught the bus, right? So what do we do from here? I will tell you that everything that we do now in my office as mayor still is driven from that ethos of being a better neighbor. And so I want to share with you one quick video of something that I was doing during my time as a District 8 city councilman, which is one of the most diverse places in the city, if not the state. We have a large refugee population there. And I started working with them very closely. In fact, I started working with them closely because I ran into a neighbor during block walking who told me about this refugee population that we have. It was a disproportionate share of refugees per the state from the previous refugee resettlement program under President Obama. These are constituents. Some of them can't vote, but they worked very hard to be here. And so as a mayor or as a city councilman at the time, my job requires me to serve them as well. And I wanted my neighbors to understand that. So we put these stories on TV. So here to sing her sister Sara To's song, We Are Not Different, is our district. This is a San Antonio neighbor, which is the. We are not different from the others. She had just gotten here from Vietnam. We are the same. We are not different 'cause the way we dress or the way we speak, we are all the same. When you see someone needed help, don't help them 'cause the way they dress. Help them because you want to. They still have heart, even if they're just different from you. We are all the same. We are not different. When you see someone needed help, don't help them 'cause the way they dress. Help them because you want to. They still have heart, even if they're just different from you. We are all the same. We are not different. We are all the same. So I only play that because this is the ethic of our office. Be a better neighbor means not better neighbor to the likely voters, not the better neighbor to the people who agree with your politics, but be a better neighbor for everybody. I think it translates even into the international political arena, but the point is this is what drives us. This is the value and the ethos of our office. So stands to reason then, one of the things I learned was to make sure that your values are expressed in the work that you do. The first two acts I wanted to make as mayor were, number one, to sign the Compassionate Cities Charter, which is a charter that basically says that everything that the city does from a public policy standpoint would be grounded in this value of compassion. Whether it's dealing with a human smuggling incident, or it's the way we treat each other on council, or it's the way we treat our guests that come to testify. We signed the Compassionate City Charter on the first day of office. We also passed a resolution re-engaging in the climate accord, the Paris Climate Accord. And that is because we also have to engage with our world communities. And if we're talking about a city, a strong city, we're also talking about one that's going to be strong not just for us, but in the future. And we're not alone in this. In Compassion or Climate, hundreds of cities have signed on to these pledges. And that's for very similar reasons. And they drive us all, whether it's issues of sustainability and climate preparedness, or it's public safety issues. The point is that we're not isolated and that we ensure that everyone has a seat and a voice at the table. Let me just walk you through then some of the issues that we faced in the time that I've been mayor. And you can see, again, this ethic of compassion come through. San Antonio was the first city to push back against an anti-immigrant law in Texas called SB 4, Senate Bill 4, which essentially gives every law enforcement officer permission at the state level to check your papers, your documentation, whether they stop you for a taillight or a busted taillight, or they stop you for some other reason. We sued. We were the first to sue, and since then every major city in Texas is suing. It's working its way through the federal courts. Top right is our police chief, who's having to defend the actions that he took on a December 23rd human smuggling incident in which we called Homeland Security, as we were supposed to, provided them access to the site. They didn't do anything, but we also called the immigration services, we also called the immigration advocates and charitable organizations to help with people who needed help. He's currently being attacked, investigated by our state attorney general, who is part of the anti-immigration circus that's happening right now. This is the fire union. Resiliency and sustainability doesn't just mean green. It also, well, it does mean green. It also means not just the leafy green, it means the money green. For us to make sure that we can pave the streets that Jonah is going to be driving on someday, or fix the trains that he might be riding in, or clean the parks that he'll be playing in, or his kids will be playing in, we have to have resources to do it. We currently have a union contract that has resulted in a union not wanting to come to the table to negotiate an expired contract for 3 years. So we're working on bringing them back to the table. But this is not an entirely popular thing to be doing, easy thing to be doing, but we're doing it because we have to. Dr. Marvin also mentioned that San Antonio is one of the most socioeconomically segregated cities in the country. Decades ago, redlining policies literally would keep certain races, ethnicities out of certain areas of town. They also would require different development codes for those different areas, and since then you've seen inequality blossom in San Antonio. The solution for that in modern politics is that we make sure that every community in a city like San Antonio, where you have 10 different districts, they all have 10 equal representatives. You take the budget and you give equal to everyone. That's the current modern solution, current modern political solution to this. You all know that if you do that and you give equal to places that started off way behind, you only further exacerbate that inequality. You're starting to see cities tackle this issue of equity and trying to restore equity in their communities, so I can truly fulfill the campaign promise that every single person gives when running, which is that it doesn't matter what part of my district or city you live in, you should expect the same high-quality services and infrastructure and so forth. You can't do that if you're dividing everything up by 10 in a city where you have, for instance, an east side that has had streets in disrepair for decades. You can't do that. So for the first time ever, this city started budgeting with an equity construct, an equity lens, where we match the resources that we have to the needs that are present in the community. We also open an office of equity to make sure that all the things that we're doing in San Antonio operationally are looked at through equity. It's a process. How do we restore the fact that every citizen, every resident in San Antonio should have the same, or should have the equal opportunity for good services and good quality infrastructure from their city. Not a very popular thing to do, especially when it means that in some cases the areas of town that might get a little less are those areas with the highest voting turnout. And then here we are fighting discrimination against some members of our LGBTQ community. This was back in 2013. As a city councilman, we passed a non-discrimination ordinance that prevented discrimination based on sexual identity, gender identity, a lot of things, sexual orientation, veteran status, race, ethnicity, all the other things that were already there, but gender identity was the biggest one. Obviously, you've seen the wave of bathroom bills now that has swept the country. We have the same issue happening in Texas, and here we are, because this is being a better neighbor. This is me serving my neighbors who are transgender or queer or whoever, because they also live next to me, and they also deserve the same kind of representation from their member of council or their mayor. And what's happening, the harm that's being done to our communities is not happening locally, but we also represent them locally, and so we take our case to the State House, and that was month 2 of office. So all this is to say that we aren't alone. Sometimes it feels that way as the state and federal governments, particularly in Texas, retreat from the obligations of serving their communities. But so far as I'm mayor, knowing the work and being grounded in the Annenberg ethic and the important quote that we read every single day, if I'm going to maintain this office, it means that San Antonio has to be part of the solution, the local solution, that we are going to lead in these issues if necessary. We were the first on SB 4, on the bathroom bill. We're also one of the first signers of a pledge on net neutrality, a founding city. All these things matter to our local neighbors, and that's what we're going to continue to do. The other thing I'd say, and there's a picture from the first campaign, and again the quote from Annenberg, is that at the city level we are nonpartisan in San Antonio. That's an important value, and I always will embrace that and try to maintain that. When you work to represent all people, they will try to shoehorn you, pigeonhole you into one or the other based on an issue that they might not like that you are talking about. But we will try as best we can, hopefully successfully, to keep this nonpartisan, because at the local level, again, we have to represent all people. All people have a voice at the table. And at the end of the day, the solutions that don't take place anywhere else must take place for our neighbors at the local level. I apologize for the first part of this program because I'm extraordinarily nervous. And the reason why is that my life changed here. I learned what I need to know in almost every situation from the people who are sitting in this room, Dr. Jameson, Carolyn, and it made me who I am today. I met my wife here. I brought my son here for the first time ever, and I want to thank you all for having me and bearing with me. Wow. Thank you all, really. I would love to answer any questions that you have. Yeah. And I'll stay here as long as it takes. Yes, ma'am.
I have to say, and I know I speak for so many people here, I am so impressed with your values and your accomplishments. And I say that as someone who is not indifferent. I was the former executive director of the Annenberg Foundation, which helped to fund your Student Voices project. My question has to do with actually Michael Nutter's book, Mayor, the Best Job in Politics.
Erica just bought it for me today.
In it, he actually talks about the job as being one in which you can accomplish something. And that's why it's the best job in politics. And he talks about his own accomplishments, tax reform, and he talks about his trade missions to recruit business, even the visit of the Pope to Philadelphia. But he also talked about his miscalculations. And one example was his decision to close neighborhood libraries because it was during the 2008 recession and he had a severe budget crisis to deal with. Do you have any miscalculations from which you learned and maybe you had to reverse?
Yeah, I do. You know, one of them in particular we're having to double down on, and that's housing. You know, San Antonio is a socioeconomically segregated community. It's not unlike other major urban areas, though, that have vast disparities in home ownership and property and equity and all that stuff. There was a displacement situation in San Antonio in which we have a lot of redevelopment occurring, and there was a particular trailer park that was basically rezoned for the purposes of creating new condominiums. I regret that episode and decision because it forced out a number of members of our community that had nowhere else to go. They were property poor. They lived in mobile homes. We didn't have a housing policy that would provide any sort of relief to them. So we, in the process of the rezoning, negotiated a soft landing from the developer, which turned out to be not so soft at all. That is an issue I regret because it pointed out a very gaping hole in public policy that we had. So currently, today, what we're doing right now is working on a comprehensive and compassionate housing policy for the city of San Antonio that encourages more affordable housing, but also deals with issues of displacement and gentrification so that communities like that, if it does occur, we have a set of rules and regulations in place that it provides relief for those communities. That is a very difficult one, and I was on the wrong side of that one when it happened. Yes, ma'am.
So I used to work for Mayor Nirenberg, so I always joke that was prior to my arrival. When he was shutting down those, I was still with Cory Booker, so I always look at him like, why would you ever do that? But anyway, one question I have for you, as I teach urban communications here and work with a lot of mayors across the country, is what do you think are one of the greatest challenges facing American cities?
You know, I'd have to say housing. I would have to say housing. You know, wages in San Antonio is a good vantage point for this. Wages have not increased at the rate at which property values have increased. So the burden on residents to just do the basics like keeping a roof over their heads has become too much to bear. In many cases, that's happening in San Antonio. So what this policy is trying to do is to equalize that. It's not reached a crisis level in San Antonio as it has in other communities, but that, to me, is probably the biggest one. There's many cities in the country, though, that are working on this issue of equity and inequity, socioeconomic inequity, and that's, for me, housing as a central component to that. Joe?
Thank you very much. It just occurred to me when you mentioned net neutrality that San Antonio used to be the headquarters of AT&T, and now they're not. They're Dallas, so you didn't have that pressure.
Yeah.
But what happens, you must have some corporate, either headquarters or major corporate placements in San Antonio that sometimes come head-to-head with some particular civic issues. It's not easy to say what if, but what if AT&T were in San Antonio? You know, how do you deal with net neutrality?
Well, I mean, our calculus has to remain what's in the best interest of the public. We have issues all the time that we unfortunately are at odds with one group or another, or even sometimes businesses. you know, our calculus has to be what's in the best interest economically for the city. Public health is a good one as well. But, you know, a friend of mine who's now on the water board always say, what's the drive-away cost of the decision that you're making? It's not always the cost up front, it's what's baked into the decision later and the impacts that it will have later down the line that's important. But, you know, net neutrality and net neutrality practices in a city like ours is as much about equity as it is about anything else, because we're trying to ensure that members of the community, whether they live in the east side or the west side or the north side or the south side, which are very, very disparate communities, have basic access to the 21st century economy. So that ultimately is the measure, not a corporate agenda. Jonah?
So, when it said things you should know about you, how did they know you voted? How did they know who you voted for?
Oh, they didn't. They didn't. They only guessed. Good job, Jonah. It's a secret ballot. Yes?
I'm going to ask you a question that you probably don't want to answer in public. Did you ever think about running for governor of Texas?
No. No.
I asked this because I'm a Texan, and I'm wondering how, if you think, and I ask this as being the mayor, do you think that Texas will be turning blue anytime soon? Because there's a shifting that's happening there, and there's a lot of stuff that's on the ground right now. I've been watching some of the political things in Austin, and I just would like to get your sense of what you think is happening in San Antonio.
So when I think in nonpartisan terms, you'll have to forgive me, I'm still not affiliated with a party. And that's the luxury of local government. We have to focus on solutions and not party. But I can speak to what you're saying because I see it every day. And for me, it's not so much about the party affiliation, because we're seeing we're saying very difficult conversations happening on both sides of the aisle. And in many cases, the parties are eating their own. What I see happening in the convulsing of the communities that I mentioned earlier is the fact that you have young people who are demanding action. They want a more progressive agenda. They want a more forward-looking agenda. They want us to make actions that will benefit them, not in the current 2-year election term cycle, but in 20 and 30 years from now when they're inheriting the consequences. And you know, the things happening in Florida on guns, for instance, that's not because all of a sudden you have more enlightened politicians. It's because they're listening to what's happening on the street. And I hear the youth saying, you know, lead, follow, or get out of the way. And in many cases, they're getting out of the way. They're choosing not to run. Some of them are getting unelected, but they're choosing not to run, many of them that don't want to carry this agenda. So when it comes to blue or red, I don't know. But what I do see happening is that it's going to get more progressive. It is going to be more pro-public agenda, mass transit, you know, all the equity issues that we've talked about. I do see that happening. And whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party that wises up to that, we'll see. We had some very progressive Republicans who unfortunately no longer in office. Or will not be in office. One of them is our very own Speaker of the House, Joe Strauss, who was a banner carrier for a compassionate conservative. So we'll see. I'm not waiting for any wave to wash over me. Yeah, Michael.
A couple of times in your talk, you talked about how what you did with the opposition of the consultants that you were working with. And it's always struck me that when people run the kind of positive campaign that you run, if they can get their message out and have a good message, that they do surprisingly well, and yet it still seems to be the logic of the field that just can't win. Can you talk a little bit more about what that was like, dealing with consultants and trying to get them to do things that or doing things they did not agree with?
I mean, you almost have to have a death wish, really. I mean, I've always tried to maintain, and that 2013 photo of the non-discrimination ordinance I showed you was a critical moment for me. I had my first death threat, for instance, during that episode. It was only a couple months into office. And I represented what was a more conservative voting area. So there was a lot of pushback on a proposal like that, but we know non-discrimination is the right thing to do. I had to come to grips with, is that going to be the last vote I cast? And you saw the recall stuff. It happened to everybody who voted that way. I had to come to grips with, I had a really great 3-month run on council. Do I want to vote that way and just say, you know, call it a career? I talked with Erica and really kept hearing my dad's voice in my head, quoting Polonius, and I said, yeah, you know, what are we here for? Because nobody's going to remember your name. They certainly won't remember your name if you're just going to go along to get along. So do your job and do it well and then leave. So if that meant 3 months or it meant 30 years, I just had to make sure that I was in the moment. So I chose to do it that way. I've campaigned that way too. I have a very brilliant consultant, and we've run good campaigns together. But decisions like that for me are about, I want to do this the way those students and student voices would have wanted me to do it, and putting it all out there and being honest. And the ultimate measure for me is I can explain my position on something, because you know, the most precious natural resource in our communities are active and informed citizens. So I wanted to do my job in informing them and informing the choices. But I didn't want them to be surprised. It's incredibly liberating if you run an honest campaign and are a bold elected representative, because nobody's surprised. Yeah, there's going to be people who are angry. Maybe they missed the commercial. But you don't have to hide behind anything because you've already put it out there, you know? And ultimately, isn't that what we want from our politics, is people who are going to show you what's under the hood before you are asked to buy the car? And for me, that's the Annenberg ethic. That's open communication that respects the dignity of other people enough to tell them the truth. Josh?
So you didn't talk about the Confederate statue removal, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, and also about how, you know, with that or the EO or the fire contract, how you filter out the amplified voices that may be the loudest but may not represent what the true consensus of the community is.
Yeah, well, Mayor Castro, my first term, a couple months in, used to tell me, don't over-listen to people. You know, because there are going to be the loudest voices in the room sometimes are the angriest, or have the, you know, a special interest. So we did remove a Confederate statue from the center of one of our public parks. It was a tense situation because it was happening right at the time of Charlottesville. So I wanted to do two things. One, I wanted to do public policy-wise what we were going to do, but I also wanted to do it in a way that also didn't make San Antonio the center of the political firestorm and cost people's lives, potentially. So we got it done without too much fuss. We did it the right way. We had public hearings and all that. But there were, and there still are, people who are angry and calling us. I think it still goes back to, where am I on this issue? And I have, you know, where doing your due diligence as a representative of the office, using all that data, just like the thesis, trying to compile where people are on the issue, but ultimately doing the right thing as it stands by your values. And that's what we did on the statute. What was the other one? On the fire union? Empirically, on the fire union contract, it's not sustainable. We will not go bankrupt because of a fire union contract, but we will have to close more libraries and not clean more parks and not pave as many streets and not do all the other things, the essential services that provide quality of life. And what are we but a city of streets and sidewalks and police cars and fire trucks if we don't have art, we don't have green space, and we don't have, you know, all the other things that people expect from a modern city. People don't move to our community because we have great sidewalks. And so that's the compromise that we have to strike. And I believe we're on the right side of that issue, and so it's requiring a little bit of chutzpah to to, you know, stick your neck out.
We have time for one last question. Because I do, if you don't.
Yes, ma'am.
I know that does. Yes.
Thank you. That was really great. I was wondering, is following up on Michael's question about the consultants and this enormous operation that you're running, what kind of advice you have for people about hiring, or like if there are things that go beyond like the normal, you know, so tell me about your experience kind of question.
Like a political consultant? How I choose a political
I mean, you
consultant?
have a huge
Oh.
operation that you're running, and so basically, like, how do you figure out how to get these jobs done? And so that's too broad of a question, right? And so I was thinking about, like, how do you find people to do all the things that you're accomplishing here?
Well, I mean, I assembled my mayoral staff, mayor's office staff, by finding experts I thought that would bring great credibility and skill to the table. We brought, my chief of policy is a former regional director of MALDEF, Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Foundation. My chief of staff is a brilliant attorney that used to work for Mayor Hardberger, and also used to work, or he's a consultant in economic development, had great expertise there in creating jobs and strengthening the economy is one for me. Our communication director is a 30-year veteran of the newspaper in San Antonio. But in terms of a consultant and the people who I bring on, regardless of their skill set, I wanted people who I can look in the eye and, you know, had the same kind of value and expectation for me as a mayor and for themselves as someone on the staff. I didn't want somebody who was going to be playing games just to get me elected. I want to be able to go to sleep at night. And for the campaign consultant, it's a compromise. You know, there's certain things that, there's certain, you know, things that we would want to do on the campaign in terms of, you know, putting out a mailer or something like that. But they have to understand who you are and how you want to conduct yourself and what ultimately will be something you can be proud of. And that's kind of how I select. I don't know if that answers your question, but they have to share your values, and they have to share, in my opinion, they have to share your expectations of yourself as a candidate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.